Hi everybody, it's Andrea Ankrum with Indivisible, Northern Kentucky District 4, and welcome to another episode of our Coffee Klatch Conversations with Candidates. Tonight's guest is Roberto Henriquez, running for the House District 66. And the way that we do this is a question and answer forum. And so if you're watching this live on our Facebook page or through our YouTube channel, please send your questions for Roberto tonight as you're watching. If not, if you're watching it recorded, you can still send questions and we'll try to get them to him as well. So welcome, Roberto. Thanks for coming tonight.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and why you're running for office?
Sure. So as Andrea said, my name is Roberto Henriquez, and I'm running for the State House District 66 here in Kentucky, which is the northern part of Boone County. And I grew up here in Boone County, went to Boone County High School, graduated from Georgetown College down in Georgetown, Kentucky for my undergrad, and did my graduate school at Northern Kentucky University, where I got my master's degree in teaching. And so I've been here most of my grown-up life. First question I usually get is when I tell people my name's Roberto Henriquez, they look at me funny and go, Henriquez? Yeah, so I am Latino. My dad is from Venezuela in South America, and I was born here in the United States. I was born in Florida, and I have 3 children who are a product of public school systems here in the States. My oldest is in college, and my middle one is in high school, and my youngest is in middle school. And so they keep me quite busy, as you might imagine. So as far as why I'm running and why I decided to run, as I looked at what was happening in Kentucky with the legislature and with the way our elected officials were behaving and the laws they were passing, I've become more and more concerned over the years. I've always been a strong proponent of education. My mother was a retired teacher, and I taught for about 6 years. That's what my master's degree is in. And I've always felt very strongly about education, and for some reason our state seems to have decided that education is bad, that public education is bad. So that was become very concerning to me. And then also the lack of transparency in our government. With whether it's the sewer bill or any other number of things that have come up recently where deals were made at the last minute and people didn't get a chance to review it, or people were left out of the conversation altogether. Those are very concerning, and that's not the way I think our government should work. Everybody should get the chance to participate in the government, and I think so. Maybe if we had more elected officials who were kind of from the everyday walks of life and different backgrounds, different jobs, different life experiences, people who understand what it's like to have been laid off for a job. I've been laid off from a job in the past, and I've had to sit there at the table with my stack of bills and look at them and go, okay, which do I have to pay today, and which ones can I maybe wait to pay next month? I've been there. I understand what that's like, and I think we need more people that have that kind of experience to take to the state legislature.
Okay, great. So we're going to jump right into our questions, and the first one is the biggest issue that we've been dealing with this past year, the public employee pensions, right? And you mentioned this a little bit in your opening monologue, Senate Bill 1, which was didn't get through, but the Senate Bill 151, the sewage bill, which they tacked everything on, passed it quickly, and now it's been found to be unconstitutional the way they've done it. All about the public employees' pensions. What is your understanding of the public employees pension issue, including current funding issues?
So the public employees pension system has been underfunded for decades now, and the funding that has been there has been used as kind of like a personal slush fund for pet projects,
Okay.
where our legislature has decided, oh, we'll take a little bit of money out of here because the investments are doing well, so it'll recover this money, but we got this project we want to fund, so we'll take that money out and it'll all be okay. And regretfully, it's just been one party. I mean, both Democrats and Republicans over the past 20 years have been guilty of doing this. So we find ourselves in a position where the Public Employee Pension Fund is on the edge. Depending what happens, there may not be enough money to fund pensions going forward. So what we need to do is we need to look at education, and particularly public pensions, and I want to stress, I think a lot of people talk about the teacher pensions,
Right.
but it's not just the teacher pensions. It's all the public state employees
Right.
that are on the public employee pension system. We need to fully fund those. That's the commitment that we have made to our public employees. They've made the commitment to us,
Right.
the people of Kentucky, to dedicate their time and their experience and their knowledge to help the state and to help us have a better place to live and help us educate our children, which is all things we get benefits. And in return, and because of that, while they may have been able to make a lot more money in the private sector, they've said, I'm willing to dedicate my time and service to the people, with the understanding that in return there's this commitment that when I retire, I'll be able to retire,
Right.
and I'll be okay. I'm not going to be rich in retirement, but I'll be okay.
Right.
And so we can't go back on that. And the first thing that the legislature has to do is say, okay, the funding that's coming in, we're going to fully fund that. If we need additional funding, additional revenues, we need to look at additional revenue sources, which we do. And an additional revenue source doesn't mean taking the money from one place
Right.
in the budget and moving it to another item in the budget. I heard, that happened this last legislative session, and I heard somebody describe it as, we found all this new revenue. No. You took it from somebody else
Right.
in the budget. So that's not the same thing. I think there are definitely some things that we can do to raise additional revenues, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about some of them. But expanded gaming, I think, is something we definitely look at. Looking into hemp and cultivation of hemp. Looking at decriminalization of marijuana. Looking at restructuring our taxes so that it's more of a progressive tax than a regressive tax. So I think there's a number of places where we can definitely generate that additional revenue.
I want to go back to something you said about taking money out of the pension system. Do you feel like there should be a stop put on that? Like you somehow,
Yeah.
we have to say, hey, we can't borrow from this, and try to prevent that from happening in the future.
Yeah, exactly. There's a number of loopholes that, and when you write a law, you try to write the law so that you think of all the possibilities and things that might happen to it, and you try to prevent those loopholes. Hopefully, you try to prevent those loopholes from eroding the spirit of the law. Why you put this law in place. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be added to say, this is the pensions are a set thing, and it's not our fund, and we can't withdraw the money from it. And if and I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, and they said, well, what if it's doing really well and there's all this money, it's just building money, and there's this big pile of money and everything's completely funded, shouldn't we? I'm like, well, okay, I think we can definitely put in a provision, but I think that money would need to go to improving the pension system or improving the public employee retirements or improving public employee benefits. I don't think it can be used as a slush fund to just say, well, we'll just pull it over to use it for this project that has nothing to do with public employees.
Right. Okay. The General Assembly passed a $22 billion education budget, which rejected some of Governor Bevin's proposed cuts. However, there were many programs that were affected, such as funding for textbooks and money for professional development. Additionally, school districts will only get a $19 increase per student for the upcoming school year. What are your ideas to support funding of our public education system in Kentucky?
So one of the few things that our legislature is specifically charged with is for the support and promotion of public education. So we need to be dedicated to that. Our legislature needs to be dedicated to that. That means that we need to fund public education. We need to stop doing things. When I say we, as the legislature needs to stop doing education mandates and then not funding them. Oh, you got to do this, but we're not going to give you any money to do that. And we need, we need to fund professional development. Almost every profession out there has requirements for ongoing education or professional development, and education is no different. And there needs to be funding there for that. Textbooks, there needs to be funding for textbooks. I got so frustrated at watching the legislative session this past winter when they were talking about, well, we don't need to use money, we don't have to have money for books because they're doing more and more digital books, and the digital books don't wear out. You still have to pay for the books.
Right.
You still have to buy the books. And the way digital books work is you don't get to buy that digital book and then just keep handing that digital copy on to the next people, the next people, next people. I think most of us have some sort of subscription service, whether it's Netflix or Hulu or whatnot. Just because you pay that subscription and you get to watch the movie this whole time, you don't get to watch it forever and ever, and you don't get to hand it around so that all your friends can watch it. So, electronic textbooks, they still have to be paid for, and there are still updates and changes to the textbooks, and they're as the information changes, history keeps being created, right?
Every day.
Yeah, exactly. So, those things have to be updated, and you can't just sit there and go, okay, well, we paid for it once, and now we never have to pay for it again. The funding that and I mentioned some of the additional sources for revenue, that revenue needs to be set aside for education. The lottery that was created back in the 90s, it was, oh, this money is going to go to education, it's going to go to education, which was great, it did for a while, but there weren't enough of those safeguards put in there to make sure that the bulk of the money continued going to education.
Right.
And so we've seen that money erode to other projects and other places. And again, that's where, laws aren't perfect the first time they're written, but what we need to do is we need to go back and look at those and say, okay, we've got to tighten this up because the purpose for this was to fund our schools.
Right.
And so going forward, as we do additional revenues and put those into law, we need to put those safeguards in there so that it doesn't get drained off.
Okay. What about your thoughts on charter schools and also tax credits for private school tuition?
So, charter schools, I think, which are basically private schools, I think private schools are fine for people who can afford to send their kids to private schools and fund the private school. I think that's great. I have no problem with that. What I do have a problem with is utilizing public funds for private schools, for private education institutions. I don't think that's an appropriate use of public funds. Or the funds that we pay into the state need to be directed to public education that everybody has access to. And if there are concerns with public schools and with, whether it's your specific school or your specific school system, there are certainly issues that come up, and those need to be addressed, whether they're addressed by the local school board or the site-based council, or if it's something major that has to raise to the level of the legislature looking into it and perhaps legislating changes. But we can't divert public funds away from what is the cornerstone of really our American society. The public school, the public education. If you read any number of things from our founding fathers, they talk repeatedly about the importance of public education and that everybody should be educated, and that it's so important that funding should never be an issue. So that kind of, the second part of that, the second part of your question on tax credits for, again, if you can afford to send your kid to a private school, then you can afford to send your kid to a private school. And I don't think giving a tax credit to divert funds from the public works is appropriate in that situation. We can work together, and our public schools are great. I'm a product of public school. My kids are a product of public schools. When issues come up, we take care of them and we work on them. So.
Okay. What are your thoughts on medical marijuana, legalizing it, and recreational marijuana, such as bringing businesses and jobs into the state, and possibly using the revenues for education?
So, I know this is a bit of a controversial issue. I am definitely for decriminalization of marijuana. We definitely need it for medicinal purposes. I also think it should be decriminalized for recreational use. I think it should be treated very much like alcohol is. You've got a certain drinking age, you've got a certain age for marijuana use. I think there's plenty of studies out there that, or a number of studies that talk about the effects of marijuana on brain development in adolescence. So that's something that we would definitely want to keep out of the hands of adolescents. But generally, once you get into your early to mid 20s, studies have shown that it really doesn't alter your brain development, because your brain's done developing at that point.
Hopefully.
So, I think it's a way we can generate a lot of revenue for our state. I think it's also a way that we can work to address address some of the issues with the opioid crisis. There's a lot of uses for medicinal marijuana when it comes to pain management, and I think rather than funneling people into a manufactured pharmaceutical that is highly addictive, which we have seen. We've seen how highly addictive it is. I think it makes much more sense to use something that's much more of a natural, non-addictive medicine to relieve pain and whatnot. So I think we run the risk of, like expanded gaming, I think we run the risk of allowing a lot of potential revenue to go to neighboring states if we wait too long.
Okay, so talking about the opioid crisis, there's multiple factors involved: big pharma, physicians overprescribing, and the need for alternative pain medications. What are your thoughts and ideas for combating this epidemic in Kentucky?
So, as with many things, it's there is no silver bullet. There's not this one thing we can do. I know it's very attractive to think that way, and it's. I think we all would love that. Oh, here, if you just do this one thing, you'll lose weight. If you just do this one thing, we'll solve the opioid crisis. So I think there's a number of things that need to be done. First off, we need to we need to treat it as the addiction as a medical issue rather than a criminal justice issue. It is a disease that needs to be treated as a medical issue. We need to get people into treatment. One of the keys to treatment is that when someone seeks treatment and they begin recovery, there is a high rate of repeat,
relapse.
Yeah, relapse. Thank you. There is a high incidence of relapse. What studies show is the key to really getting people off of the addiction is to make sure that there are follow-up services for when they relapse. So it's not just getting the person into rehab the first time, which is important and is difficult. We have some programs that are doing really good. The Needle Exchange program in Grant County, which is something else we need to expand, is the Needle Exchange program. They're having tremendous success with using that to get people into treatment. But there's a limited number of beds for treatment. So that becomes a problem, which Grant County saw during through part of the Needle Exchange program, is they had so many people who wanted into rehab, but they didn't have the beds available to get them into rehab. So there was a period of time where they were waiting for that.
That's not good.
So I think we need to expand the number of treatment facilities that we have, and treatment facilities that have proven programs that are evidence-based and can show the evidence as to here's what we do, here's how we do rehab, here's how it works, here's how we follow it up, and here's what we do when people relapse. So,
what about the supply side, the big pharma and the physicians? Is there anything the Kentucky legislature can do to try to hold them accountable and maybe get them to pay for some of the treatment part of it that we're having to deal with because of their products?
Yeah, I think, so on the pharmaceutical manufacturers side, I think we definitely need to hold them accountable for the basically massive amounts of opioids that they dumped into the state and into certain counties. There are some counties where there are literally hundreds of doses for every man, woman, and child in the county that were dumped in there. So, pharmaceutical companies have definitely helped our society. They help people. There are medications that are desperately needed, and those are great, and we need those things. But they also need to be a good corporate citizen, and they need to take responsibility for, I believe, for their part in the opioid issue. So I think, I support Andy Bashir, his move to try to get some money from the large pharmaceutical companies to help us fight the opioid issue. Doctors, I think doctors definitely need to be held accountable for what they're doing, and I think we see that a fair bit. We've seen a number of instances where the state organization, name escapes me right now, but they've
DEA, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the federal one.
Okay.
It's anyway. Yeah. They've identified doctors who have overprescribed and haven't done what they needed to do, and then have held them accountable for that. So I think that's important.
Okay, great. So higher education costs are skyrocketing. The average college student ends up tens of thousands of dollars in debt upon graduating from college. Do you have any solutions for this crisis? How can the Kentucky government support our students in their pursuit of higher education?
Yeah, so public school funding has higher education funding in particular, public school funding in general, but higher education funding has dwindled significantly as a percentage of what it costs to go to school. It used to be not so long ago, I mean, even 20, 25 years ago, you could go to a public college and work your way through school.
Right.
You could have a campus job part-time, you could work in the summers, and you could make enough money that you could go and get a college degree.
Right.
It was tight, but it was doable. And what we've seen over the past 25 years is a more and more burden placed on the student, and rather than seeing the state support funding higher education as a way of creating a more educated public, a more educated workforce, a workforce that's capable of earning higher wages, therefore putting more money back into the economy. We've seen students start to be viewed as profit centers. Here's a way we can make money on these students right now. We'll make it so that they have to take out these loans, and we'll charge interest on the loans, and we'll make sure that there's no way they can ever get rid of this loan. So now you're getting a degree and you're $20,000, $30,000 in debt, depending where you go, whatnot. And if you're lucky, you're paying it off in 30 years. But if you're like a lot of people, you never pay it off. And I think in the state of Kentucky, if somebody wants to go to college to get a bachelor's degree, they should be able to do that without going into debt. It should be funded to the point where, personally, I believe it should be funded to the point where they could get a master's degree potentially without incurring any debt at all. And I think one way that we could do that is if somebody says, okay, I want to get my bachelor's degree, I want to use this program where the state funds it, then they commit to spending 2 years working in some sort of state public works program. And there's actually some programs like that already in existence that we could use to dovetail into it. So we wouldn't be creating this from the ground up. It would just be an expansion. And so, we're investing money, and the state's spending some money on these students getting their education, but then we're getting some investment back from them. And I think that you spend 4 years getting your bachelor's degree, then you spend 2 years working on some project, somewhere in the state. I think ultimately that makes you a better citizen, because now you're invested. You're physically invested your time and your sweat into the community that has invested in you to help you get your education. And so I see a lot of positiveness out of that, and I think that's something that we've really gotten away from, is this idea of being invested in our community and our community being invested in us.
Okay. Governor Bevin touts the decreasing unemployment rate as a success, but we know that a lot of the jobs that have come into Kentucky are low-wage jobs, right? A lot of them are less than $15 an hour, and most of them are less than $10 an hour. How would you address this issue of working class people not getting ahead in this current environment of pro-corporations?
So, I think that I think it's possible to be pro-corporation and pro-worker. And I know sometimes we hear that as it's an either-or. We definitely want to attract corporations and companies into our state and into our areas because they do provide jobs and they provide increase to the infrastructure and quality of living. But again, we want to make sure that they're doing it in a good citizen type of way.
Right.
So, creating jobs at different pay scales, at different levels, is important. But the people who work those jobs need to be able to make a living. And by making a living, they need to be able to live. They need to be able to go home at night and know that there's food for them and for their children and their spouses and whatever parents, whoever they're supporting. They need to know that they're going to be able to pay their rent. The basic things in life that at least in America, I think, we should, the pursuit of happiness, right? There's some basic things we should be able to count on.
Right.
So I think there needs to be a minimum wage that is greater than what we see now. I've heard numbers of $10 an hour, $10.10, $15 an hour. I think right now, all things being equal, I think $15 an hour is about right for a basic living wage. I know that causes a lot of concerns for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, the mom and pop shops, and I appreciate that. I think one of the things we could do to take care of that is as we provide tax incentives to large companies and large corporations, which we like to do to try to help attract them to the area. I think we need to expand those programs so that we can offer tax incentives to smaller companies and the small mom and pop shops. And I think the benefits, across the board, those tax incentives should be tied to some sort of pass-through benefit to the workers, the people working at those places. So, okay, we'll give you this tax benefit, whatever it is, 2%, whatever it is, 3%, I don't know what the number is, but a tax incentive. But in exchange for that, you're going to commit to pay your employees $15 an hour. And the tax incentive is going to help offset that. We'll get that number so that it helps offset that. It may not offset it completely, but will help offset that significantly. So now if you have all the people in your community making a living wage of $15 an hour or whatever the number is, they're in a better place to now buy more things in the community. And so you start seeing this knock-on effect of expanded income for your businesses. And I think, if companies want to provide even more benefits, then maybe there's additional tax incentives, So, okay, we're going to cover
tuition reimbursement or something,
something. We'll give additional incentives for that. But I think if the company, at whatever level, commits to that and takes those tax incentives, and then they don't provide those benefits, then there needs to be a mechanism written into the law so that the state can go back to those businesses and go, look, you didn't live up to your end of the bargain, so we need to get some of that money back from you.
Okay. Some of the unemployment numbers in Kentucky is due to the lack of skilled workers. How do we ensure that we have enough skilled workers in our area here to support our growing economy?
Well, I think taking care of our higher education funding issue is one way you make sure that you have some additional higher skilled workers. I think we also need to seriously look at our apprenticeship programs. We have unions in this country and in this state that have that have strong apprenticeship programs that I think lots of times students aren't necessarily informed about or understood. I've seen something of a disturbing trend over the last, again, 25 years, 30 years of vocational programs being removed from our school systems. I know there are still some around. I think Campbell County has a good one, right? I know, here in Boone County we used to have a really good vocational school system, and it's gone away. So I think we need to those trades and those crafts and doing things with your hands and things that may not necessarily be from a 4-year college degree, those are highly skilled areas as well, and we need to encourage kids to go into that if that's where their interest lies, and we need to make sure those systems or those education programs are available to them. And this is another place where I think companies, especially larger companies, could play another part of good corporate citizenship, is helping with those internship programs and helping with those training programs. I think, or if I remember right, I think last year our governor mentioned Germany as how great their manufacturing was and what a great system they had. Well, one of the things that Germany does is the companies in Germany strongly invest in trade programs and in internship programs and in apprenticeship programs. They're very heavily involved, and they give a lot of money to those programs. Germany also has a workers union that represents all workers.
Wow.
All workers in the entire country.
Wow.
So I think we can get there, and I think we can get additional people trained in skills. We just have to make the investment and be smart about it. And again, invest in them, and they'll invest in us.
Right. So how do you feel about right to work, and what are your thoughts on Kentucky adopting a right to work environment?
Yeah, so right to work is not right to work.
Right, it's the wrong name for it.
It's a great marketing ploy, right? I support repeal of right to work. It's simply a way to try to remove funding from unions and starve them for funds so that workers have less and less representation and somebody in their corner fighting for them. So,
Okay, let's talk about taxes. The last legislative session implemented some new taxes, a 5% flat tax. So basically giving a tax increase on the poor people and decreasing taxes on wealthy people, and then also implementing a service-based tax. What are your thoughts on the way that we should be doing our taxes here in Kentucky?
Well, first off, whether it's a tax law or any other law, I think it needs to be available for public review and input for at least 5 business days. So I don't think any tax reform law should be rushed through before it's had time to be looked at and discussed and look at potential impact and maybe mitigate those before the law is passed, which is something which we've seen exactly with this. One of the unintended consequences of this tax reform is that nonprofits now have to charge tax when somebody goes to buy a ticket or pay something, and there's no mechanism for these groups to collect that and pay it, and it's created quite a problem for many nonprofit organizations that are out there trying to help people every day. That's
Right.
what they do, help people. And so that's quite frustrating. But that's what happens when you get things that are rushed through without time to review them and look at them appropriately. I think our economy is definitely switching from more of a goods-based economy to more of a service-based economy. And our tax system needs to be adjusted to take that into account. But we need to take the time to look at, okay, how are we taxing those services? What services are we taxing? Are we taxing services that create more of a burden on the poor people and the working class, or is it more of a fair service that maybe taxes services more towards the high end and a little less towards the low end, rather than taxing the vet for everybody that takes their cat and dog or turtle, rabbit, to the vet, maybe, let's not tax them, but let's maybe tax the people who, service boats or
yachts.
something that people that tend to have more money are going to be paying a little more fair share. A lot of this current tax bill that was done, it seems to be very heavily weighted on the poorer people, and rather than on people who may be in a better position to be able to afford an extra 10 cents or an extra $10 or whatever it may be.
Right. Okay. There was a House Bill 227. It was basically an anti-solar bill, and it passed. But it rewards monopoly utility companies and basically punishes consumers. And it will put rooftop solar out of the reach for most Kentuckians. Kentucky needs to keep up with the rest of the country in terms of clean, green energy. What would you do to help protect and promote the use of clean energy?
So first on that particular bill, that was very disturbing to me, very upsetting. I keep saying disturbing. It was very upsetting to me because people could put, the situation is you could put solar panels on your house. If you generated enough electricity that you were generating more electricity than you used, you can sell that back to the utility company, which then they can use to sell and make money on. The utility companies were having to pay the retail rate to you. So the rate that you pay the utility company when you use electricity, that was the rate they were having to pay you.
Seems fair.
Right, if you were giving them.
Right.
And what they said was, no, that's not fair. We want to only pay you the wholesale rate if you sell us electricity. Which makes no sense to me. I mean, yeah, if you have a huge power plant that are generating, megawatts of energy that you're selling, okay, yeah, that's wholesale. But if I make a stack of greeting cards and I go out to sell them to somebody, they're going to pay retail. They're going to pay me retail for it. They're not going to pay wholesale for it just because they may happen to be in the greeting card business. Same thing, so they should be paying that. As far as energy in general, we need to be supporting green energy and the development of green energy, whether it's solar, wind, geothermal, whatever. Kentucky for decades has been at the forefront of energy production in this country. And we should continue to be there. In order to developing energy, new energies and new energy usage, there has to be significant public investment. If we go back to electricity, and when electricity was first being spread across the country, there was tremendous investment from both the federal and the state governments to develop this and spread it and make sure that it got to all the houses and make sure that it got to all the communities. You know, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, one of the largest public works projects ever. New energy technology takes significant public investment before it can become self-sustaining. We've seen it in the past, and it's just the way it is. So we need to make that commitment and support it and make those investments and train our folks who are energy experts, whether it's coal or natural gas or whatever. You know, let's train those workers and move them into this. You're still working in energy. You're still the backbone of what makes this country work, right? Without energy, none of this happens. So.
Okay. So, in the past year or so, we've seen an increase in school shootings, mass shootings. What are your thoughts on arming teachers in public schools, and do you think that Kentucky should have stricter gun ownership laws?
So, again, another one not with a simple answer or with a single answer. You know, it's a very complex issue. Personally, I do not support arming school teachers. I don't think it's the right way to go. Most of the teachers I talk to are not in favor of arming teachers. I have talked to some school teachers who are in favor of arming teachers. And I understand where their desire to help and do more comes from. Okay, the teachers that I've spoken with that want to carry guns, they don't want to do it because they just want to have a gun in the classroom. They want to do it so that they can help protect their kids, so they can help protect the students, because they care about the students. They love their students. Teachers are passionate about their students and care deeply for their students. So I understand the desire to want to help them that way. I just think it creates an environment where there's potentially more problems, more issues, whether it's a student getting a gun or a gun getting accidentally mishandled. And I know, people say, oh, well, I'm really good at handling a gun. But we hear instances where people who know how to handle a gun can have an accident and accidentally mishandle it. And the thought of a teacher potentially being in that situation where they accidentally discharge a weapon and injure a child or kill a child is just heartrending to me. And I think it would be to that teacher as well. So on the gun issue, our schools, we need to do a better job of identifying issues where students are feeling marginalized, where students are feeling disconnected, disengaged. I think that's something that definitely needs to be addressed, and I think that means we need more counselors in our schools. The counselors in our schools are tasked with impossible jobs. Right. They really are. Right. There may be only 2 or 3 counselors for a high school of 1,500 students. Yeah. And besides their counseling duty, they're also working with students on trying to get them ready for college and SAT prep and all the other things that we ask our counselors. So I think we need additional counselors in school to help help us connect with students. I think having a resource officer in every school, I think it's a good idea for several reasons. One, it does provide a level of immediate protection at our public schools, and I think that's a good thing. I think it also allows our law enforcement the opportunity to interact with our students and students to interact with our law enforcement and start building that positive relationship early. And I think that's really important. So I see a real bonus there. I think I think there are some gun ownership issues where we need to tighten some things up. Background checks. I think we need to eliminate the loophole with background checks at gun shows and stuff like that. I think everybody should have to have a background check. I don't see a problem with that. If you're a person of good standing, law-abiding citizen, and have no flags on your background check, then certainly you should be able to own a gun.
Right.
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. Governor Bevin has basically declared war on Medicaid recipients. What are your thoughts on the Kentucky Medicaid system, and how will you support it?
So, the Medicaid program, the expansion was a good thing. It benefited a lot of people. It helped a lot of people who need the help. So it's very confusing to me as why we would roll that back. So I think we need to roll back the rollback, keep the expansion of Medicaid, and I think we need to expand it further to people who need it. Clearly we have, without going too deep, we clearly have an issue with medical care in the United States in general and in Kentucky. When you have people that have to take out GoFundMe pages to try to help pay for their medical bills, not for elective surgeries, but for life-saving surgeries and life-saving treatments, that's a problem. That's a problem. You shouldn't need to do that. So we need to address it. But particularly are the most vulnerable members of our society, the poor and the people who are have severe medical issues. We need to have that support there, and then whether it's physical ailments or whether it's mental ailments, there needs to be that treatment. It needs to be available, and it shouldn't break you to have to get any treatment that you need to have.
Absolutely. Okay, that's all the questions that we have. So why don't you talk to our audience a little bit and tell them why they should vote for you on November 6th.
Right. I think Kentucky is, I think Kentucky's a great state. I love Kentucky. I've been around most of Kentucky. I've been to most parts of Kentucky, not all parts, but most of it. And every place I go, I find people that care for each other. And you hear people call it Southern hospitality or whatever, but I think it's more than just hospitality. You can be hospitable to someone, but not actually care. And what I find is people in Kentucky care for each other. They care about each other. When our neighbors have a problem, we chip in and help them. If they have a fire, we help them rebuild. And that's very Kentucky to me. So I have that spirit in me. I want to help. I want to make Kentucky a better place every day. I want to continue to make it better. And what I see happening with our legislators, many of them currently in Kentucky, they don't seem to be making it a better place. And sometimes I get the feeling that, do they really care for each other and for us? So if you care about somebody, you're open with them and you're honest with them. And even if you have to have a tough conversation with somebody, you care about them and you have those tough conversations. And if you're going to pass laws, you don't hide the laws. You don't keep it under a blanket and don't let anybody see it. And, okay, we're going to pull it out at the last minute. That's just not the way you treat people you care about. So one of the things that I'm going to commit when I'm elected is, one, I'm going to have regular town hall meetings in my district at least every other month. We'll sit down in a public place and come talk to me. I want to hear what your thoughts are. I want to hear what your concerns are, what your issues are. I want to hear, what's at your heart, what's hurting you today. And let's talk about those and see what we might be able to do to fix them. Are we going to agree on everything? No, we're not. We're just different people, and different people disagree on things all the time. But what we can do is we can be respectful of each other, and in those areas where we do disagree, we can at least try to understand where each other's coming from and seeing if we might still be able to help in some way. So those are commitments that I make to you, and I ask that, if those are important things to you, transparency in your government and having representatives that are available to you, people that care about education and want to see our children educated and better themselves so that they do better than we do. Those kind of things are important to you. Then I ask for you to vote for me this November, and I commit to you that I'll be there and I'll work for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Roberto, for joining us tonight. And everybody, please go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel page, and you can see a recording of this. Share it with your friends and neighbors. And don't forget to join us again next week for another episode. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks.